This is an oral history interview with Myrlin Buckingham in his home on May 9, 1984. The interviewer is Susan Gortner. Mr. Buckingham, what was your father's name and where was he born?
Noah Hershey Buckingham, born
Do you have any idea the area he was born in?
I should know that.
Well, that's okay if you can't think of it. Maybe it'll come to you later. How about what was your mother's name?
Ada May Beery,
Mm-hmm.
born near Saragordo, Illinois.
Do you know how many members each of your parents had in their family?
Well, my mother was the oldest of 9 children, and my father had one brother and one sister.
Mm-hmm. How much schooling did they have?
My mother formerly only got through the 3rd grade, but she had some periodic schooling after that.
Uh-huh.
My father went just through grade school, no high school.
Uh-huh. Which is very common in those days.
Yes, and I've heard my mother say that when she was young, that when spring work came, the boys all stayed out of school and helped.
What type of work did your father do?
He was a farmer.
Where was the farm located?
Near Saragordo, Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Is some of the family still on the farm?
No, the farm has been sold.
Okay. The name Buckingham, what is the ancestral origin of that?
That would be English.
English. Do you have any idea when your family came over from England?
I do not have. There is a history partially completed,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't tell you the date. I think it was in the 1600s.
So,
And we do have a map that shows where they originated in England.
the name Beery, do you know what origin that is?
I believe that would be German, or the old ancestor came from look it up. Nicholas Berry. My ancestor came from Switzerland.
Did your mother ever work outside the home?
To my knowledge, she never did, except she might have worked as a housekeeper or just a helper locally, but she never had what we would call a gainfully employed job. No, she never did.
How many children were there in your family?
I have one brother and one sister. I'm the middle one.
Uh-huh.
My brother's older, my sister's younger.
Were you born on the farm in Saragordo?
Yes, I was.
When were you born?
March 1st, 1914.
What were some of the games that you and your brothers and sister played when you were growing up?
Oh, I can't remember anything specific. We played, I suppose, all the common games of hide and seek and those things. I don't remember any unusual games that we played. We just played. We always had dogs and pups, and we played with those.
What kind of chores were you responsible for?
Well, we had to, we raised chickens in those days, and that was one of our jobs. We had to help with the chickens, and we always had a few geese, and we even had guinea hens. We had ducks. My mother was a person who liked to be involved in things like that. She always raised chickens. She dressed chickens and sold them to stores in Decatur before the days of refrigerated and frozen chickens. So we always had a lot of things like that to do, and of course we helped with the barn chores. We had kept cows, milked anywhere from 6 to 12 cows, as all farmers did then.
Mm-hmm. Did you help transport your goods into Decatur?
Yes, we had to.
How did you take them in?
Well, we just hauled them in the car.
You had the cart.
We dressed chickens and load them in a
Mm-hmm.
tub and ice them down if we had any ice, and take them to the store in Decatur.
Did you have anybody live with your family besides your brothers and sisters?
We did at one time when I was very small. We had a hired maid, we called her. I barely remember her, and I'm not sure how long we had her, probably a year or two. Mm-hmm. And that's the only one. Other than that, we didn't have any.
Did you have any hired hands that...
Yes, we had, mainly in corn shucking season, we would have 2 hired hands come in to shuck corn.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, my dad and the 2 boys did it.
How far did you live from school?
From grade school, we were 1.5 miles, and we walked, of course. Mm-hmm. From high school, we were 5.5 miles.
What was your typical school day like? Was it a one-room country school?
Yes, it was a typical one-room country school, and of course the teacher had to teach all grades. We alternated one year. It would have been 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, and the following year was 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th year. Mm-hmm. So if you happened to be born the wrong year, you either started when you were 5 or you waited till you were 7. Uh-huh. So I guess I was about 7 before I started. And I would have to say that I think we might have missed some things in those country schools, but on the other hand, I think we learned just as much as we would now in town schools.
Were your teachers men or women?
We had some of each. My first teacher was a man. Mm-hmm. First year, and my 5th grade teacher was a woman, and I just saw in this week's paper where she died, 93 years old.
What did you take in your lunches?
Oh, of course we had sandwiches and deviled eggs and boiled eggs, and because we had plenty of those, and sometimes in cold weather we'd have a thermos bottle, carry hot chocolate. Mm-hmm. And we didn't go in for oranges too much back then, so we had apples, which we grew ourselves. And that's about it, I guess.
You mentioned a car. Do you recall what kind of car your family had?
Well, the first one was a 1914 model Overland. And I think I might have been several years old when my parents bought that car. When it finally wore out, they went to a Model T Ford. Mm-hmm. And that I remember real well.
Do you ever recall seeing an airplane as you were a young boy?
Yes, we had to go to Decatur to see it. This was after the First World War. And we read in the paper that there would be an airplane parked on a lot in what is almost downtown Decatur now. And so we went down to see it. And that was quite a...
Was it an airplane used in World War I?
I'm not sure. I was only 5 years old, so I don't really know, but it probably was.
Do you recall your family ever going in? Did they ever go into the theater, or what did you do for entertainment as you were growing up?
No, my parents were not one to go to theaters. The only entertainment we had was local things, like occasionally there would be chautauquas, or there would be a visiting singer come to the towns of Cerro Gordo or Lake Place or Hammond. We were right in the middle of all three, so we had access to all three of those, but very little entertainment as we'd call it now.
Did you have a radio?
No, not for years and years. We
Uh-huh.
didn't have a radio. I think it was about 1936 before we had a radio. Being in the country, we didn't have electricity, and my parents didn't want to bother with battery sets, so we just didn't have one.
Where did you go to high school then?
I went to Hammond High School.
And how did you get there?
Well, 2 years I rode a pony. The next 2 years I drove a car, not by myself. We carpooled back then, and we'd pick up all the neighbor kids, and we'd take turns, and I would drive 1 week, and somebody else would drive another week.
How big was your high school?
I think about 66 was the most we ever had. And my class had 18.
18. Do you recall anything about Prohibition as you were growing up?
I remember when it was repealed, and I knew that I would hear people speak of a man being drunk, and I didn't know what a drunken man was. I'd never seen one.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something new to me when I saw a drunken man.
After you went to high school, what did you do?
Well, about 2 years I helped on the farm. My parents were still on the farm. And I did have a job working in a hardware store for about a year.
Where was that located?
That was in Hammond.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I went to Decatur, and I had a job for Westervelt Paper Company driving his delivery truck. I did that, I think, a little over a year. Enjoyed that job.
Mm-hmm.
And I might say Mr. Westervelt's daughter is Margaret Bauman, who lives here in Monticello.
Oh.
So I knew her when she was in high school.
Uh-huh. How did you meet your wife?
I met her at church. Her family moved into the Lay Place area, and that's where we attended church, and that's where I met her.
What was the name of your church?
Church of the Brethren, or the old Dunkard Church it was known as years ago, but now it's called Church of the Brethren.
It's still there then?
Yes, it's still there, and they have built a new building.
Do you recall your first date?
Not really. I think we just sort of met each other at church, and it just went from there. I can't really recall the first date, no.
What is her name?
Her name is Dorothy Ada Edwards. Maiden name was Edwards.
When were you married?
We were married May 17th, 1944.
How many children do you have?
We have one son, Charles.
After you stopped driving the truck for the paper company, what did you do?
I got a job as chauffeur for Adolf Mueller, who was then president of Mueller Company in Decatur.
What did the Mueller Company make?
They make brass fittings, fire hydrants, and at that time had vitreous ware plumbing, but they no longer have that. And they had a plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, one in Toronto, Canada, and they wintered in Miami Beach, Florida. So I really enjoyed that because I got to spend the winters in Miami Beach. 5 winters I spent.
What kind of car did you drive?
They had a Lincoln, which was a $5,000 car back then, and I thought that was about the highest priced car you could buy. Now, I suppose that would compare to a $50,000 car nowadays.
What were your responsibilities as chauffeur?
Well, I was more than a chauffeur. I did yard work too, and even did some serving in the house when they would entertain. I would be I guess you'd call it a butler. I helped serve tables, which I didn't mind at all. I wore a white coat and sort of enjoyed meeting people. Especially in Florida, I would meet occasionally people like S.S. Kresge, and they lived right across the street. So I enjoyed him. He was a very common person. He didn't have a chauffeur, did their own driving.
Where was the house located in Decatur?
In Decatur, it was on Milliken Place, which is an extension of West Prairie Avenue, and just behind Milliken, the old Milliken homestead. Rather secluded drive because it's a dead end, so we didn't have much traffic back in there. Beautiful house.
What were the roads like in those days when you drove down to Florida?
Well, they were all 2-lane. They were comparatively good roads, but no 4-lane roads or no super highways as we have now, and it took much longer. We figured about 4 days then, where we could make it in 3 now easily.
How long did you stay with them?
I was with them a little over 5 years. I spent 5 winters in Miami Beach.
That's a hard job to give up.
Well, there was a little thing called World War II came along, and that sort of took me away from my work here.
Let's go back just a minute. Were you working for them during the Depression?
Well, it would have been, yes, during the Depression. Maybe toward the latter part of it, but, I started in 1936, so I guess it would have been right in the middle of it.
What do you remember about the Depression?
Well, I know that we lived fairly simply, but it didn't affect our living too much because being on a farm, we had our own meat, our own eggs, our own chickens, our own milk, and it really didn't bother us that much. I know that other people who lived in town had more of a problem than we did. But we didn't buy very many clothes. Usually went to J.C. Penney. That was my graduating suit from high school, was a J.C. Penney suit. And probably paid about $19 for it. And that was the going price in those days.
Did you or your folks lose any money when the banks closed?
I was wiped out. I had a pig, which I sold for $22, and I put $16 of it in the bank, and the bank closed right after that. But I got it back eventually.
Which bank was it?
This was a bank in Lay Place. In fact, this was before the Depression, really, but that bank closed before the others did, so I lost all my savings.
Do you know if your father lost any money?
No, I don't think he lost any money in any bank closings. They didn't have much to lose in those days. They didn't have a very big backlog of cash like we think we have now.
Did your employer, was it Mueller?
Adolf Mueller.
Did he have any problems, or was he well enough off that it didn't really affect him?
I would doubt very much if he was bothered too much. I'm sure their business was affected, but they survived and made it through. He was a good businessman.
Now you mentioned World War II. Did you enlist in the beginning, or were you...
No, I was drafted in October 1941.
What service did you serve in?
I was in the Army. 3 years.
Where were you stationed?
Well, I began my training in Camp Roberts, California, and then when Pearl Harbor Day came along, my training wasn't finished, and they put us on guard duty on the West Coast, so we went up to Washington, various places on guard duty. Then I ended up at
That's okay.
forgotten the name of the camp in Washington, and then was shipped across the country to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and from there was sent overseas. I went to Australia, finished my training there, ended up in New Guinea.
Huh. Did you see much action?
Yes, we had one major campaign in New Guinea, which was supposed to last about a week and ended into more like 60 days.
When you were on the West Coast when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, what kind of reaction was there out there?
People were pretty scared out there. They didn't know what to think, because I'm sure that they expected they would come right on through and come on over and land on the West Coast. So they were pretty scared out there, and I can understand why.
When did you get out of the service?
I was discharged in December of 1944.
And then what did you do when you came back?
Well, I came back thinking I would get a job in a factory. And I met my wife's uncle, and he at that time ran a gasoline truck, and he told me they were needing some help out at Robert Allerton's estate near Monticello, and he wondered if I would be interested in gardening work. And I said yes, I would. So I went out to look into this, and that's what I did. I got on the gardening crew at Allerton Park, which at that time was known as Robert Allerton Farms, and was still owned by Robert Allerton.
Well, Mr. Allerton was still there at that time, too.
Yes, he was there in the summertime. However, the first year I was there, he was in Hawaii and could not get transportation back to the States, so I did not see him for over a year after I worked for him.
What did you do? What were your responsibilities?
Just general gardening work, maintenance work on mowing and weeding and trimming. We had a lot of hedges, of course, to trim there.
Where did you live then?
We lived in what is now known as the gatehouse. It was the house built for the gardener. And the head gardener at that time lived with us. He had a room in the house. He was not married. He lived in the room and had his meals with us.
So you and your wife lived there?
Yes, that was our first home.
How long did you live there?
We lived in that house about 5 years. And then we moved across the river 3 miles away into another house on the grounds, which had been a former farmhouse. And that house was remodeled in 1949, and we moved into it the day after Thanksgiving of 1949. And we lived there 31 years.
So that was really home.
That was our home. We hated to leave.
What kind of activities went on at the Allerton estate in those days?
Very little when I came there, because, first of all, because of the war. Second of all, Robert Allerton was getting older, and so he did not entertain much. And of course, the first year I was there, he was not there because he couldn't get transportation back from Hawaii. So there was very little going on when I was there. I understand in earlier days he entertained quite lavishly.
Have the gardens changed a lot?
Yes, they have. Not so much since I was there, but they changed before I came because of the lack of help, and so they just simplified them somewhat. They have not changed too much in the years since I've been there.
So the formal gardens and everything were...
They're pretty much the same as they were.
Did they ever have a vegetable garden there?
Yes, they did. They raised all their own vegetables.
Where was it located?
At one time, they were in what is now known as the brick garden that has the brick walls all around it.
Mm-hmm.
They raised vegetables there. Then they later went to flowers, and of course now it's in grass. The vegetable garden was across the road from what people see now back of the buildings, so it was not something that people saw, but they did raise all their own vegetables there.
To just backtrack a little bit, where were you and your wife married?
We were married in the Lake Place Church where we first met.
Was it a fairly big wedding?
Rather small, I think about 50 guests, because people from very far away couldn't get transportation, and my wife didn't want a big wedding, so it was rather small.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a honeymoon at all?
Yes, we were able to do that. We got enough gasoline ration stamps to take us to my brother's house in northern Indiana, and he was a part owner of a cottage on a lake, so we spent a week there.
Oh, that was nice.
And really enjoyed that.
Were there very many problems with rationing?
Yes, there was, and we didn't drive very far then. Mm-hmm. However, I was still in the service, and when we were married, and I was able to get enough stamps to take us on a trip. Mm-hmm. Many other people were not that fortunate.
What were your impressions of Monticello? Do you recall when you did you ever come here as you were growing up? Or?
Yes, I was familiar with Monticello. We would occasionally come here, and of course it being the county seat, my parents had to come here to transact any business. Mm-hmm. And we also, when I was growing up in the grade schools, we had to come here for county exams and lectures in the old opera house, which is now the community building. And so I was familiar with Monticello.
What kind of exams did you have?
Well, they called them final exams, which all 8th grade students had to take. And if you didn't pass that, you were not supposed to be promoted into high school. I'm not sure how strict they were on that, but I know we worried a lot about it, whether we would make a passing grade, and I was lucky enough that I did. But
were they written or oral?
They were written. And people that remember Charles McIntosh as the county superintendent know that he was pretty strict.
Mm-hmm. Were the exams fairly difficult?
Yes, I would say they were difficult.
So you lived on the out near Allerton Park for 31 years. Is that what you said?
Yes, we lived in the same house 31 years. I actually worked for him 36 years.
When did John Allerton, when was he adopted by?
Well, he lived with Robert Allerton, I think, since 1931, but he was not formally adopted until sometime in the 60s when they changed the law so that an adult could be adopted.
Do you remember meeting John Allerton?
Yes. I met them in the summer of 1947 when they first came back from Hawaii.
What did your wife do during this period?
At the time when we lived in the gatehouse, she was not employed, but then she had been a teacher before we were married, and she quit teaching when we were married. Then we had our son Charles, and when he was 5 years old, I was approached by the president of the school board, who was also my supervisor at Allerton Park, and asked me if my wife would. This was Fay Root, who was supervisor of Allerton Park. He was also president of the school board for some years. And my wife had registered her certificate just to keep it in effect, and he asked me if she would be interested in teaching. And so I approached her, and she said, "Well, what do you think?" And we decided that since her mother was living here in Monticello and she would go right by their house coming into town, that would make a good babysitter. So she started back teaching when our son was 5 years old.
Where did she teach?
She taught at Lincoln School.
What grade?
Originally she taught first and second grades. Then later on, when they had more pupils than they divided, she taught first grade. Build up residential.
You came probably to do some of your grocery shopping in Monticello. Do you recall the stores that you used?
Yes, we did buy our groceries from Elmer Omke's grocery store. There were several others around the square, not supermarkets as they are now. And one reason we started buying from Mr. Omke was that Robert Allerton bought his groceries there, and they came to town twice a day with their station wagon. And so if we wanted groceries, it was real convenient to call our order in, and then Mr. Allerton's station wagon would pick it up and bring it right to our door. So that was pretty good service back in the days when gas was rationed.
What did they come to town twice a day for, do you know?
Just supplies and pick up the mail. Mail was not delivered out there then. And
did Elmer Pree, was he the one was it his job to come in to town?
No, I don't think so, except for the farms. He probably did, but for Allerton House, they had a bus boy that did that, or the butler, and even some of the maid might come in, and whoever was available.
Where was the grocery store located on the square?
The Omke store was on the southeast corner of the square, which is now Gamble's store.
Do you remember going to the library?
Yes, at that time it was a very small one in the south room of the community building.
Now, was the Opera House on the main floor where the library is located now?
Yes, it was.
What was above it?
Well, it had a balcony, of course.
And so it was just the balcony?
Yes, a main auditorium with a high ceiling and a balcony.
Do you recall going to programs there?
No, I never did. I think they had stopped those before I was old enough to go.
What were some of the organizations and churches that you belonged to in Monticello?
Well, we put our membership in the what is now the United Methodist Church. It was just simply known as the Methodist Episcopal in those days. That was soon after they united with the Southern Methodists, and then they called it just Methodist Church. Now it's United Methodist Church.
Do you recall the name of the minister that was there?
Yes, the first minister we had was Thomas Crumpy. He later went to California,
What other organizations have you belonged to?
Well, I'm a member, of course, of the Farm Bureau, and now I'm a member of the Historical and Genealogical Society, member of the Heritage Center. My wife belongs to the Garden Club.
When you worked at Allerton Park, and what year did you retire from there?
I retired in February 28th of 1981.
So that's not been very long ago.
I celebrated my birthday by retiring.
Have you enjoyed your retirement?
I certainly have. I've never been bored. I'm involved in enough things that I keep busy.
Uh-huh. Can you think back a little and tell us some of the people that were working at Allerton, out at the Allerton estate when you began there?
Well, of course, my supervisor was Albert Priebe, a brother to Elmer Priebe, who is still active in Allerton Farms. And he retired then because of his age. And there have been several others since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually took Albert's place. I was called the park foreman.
Mm-hmm.
And there were not too many workers back in those days because everybody was involved in war effort. But we did have one man, Charlie Falk, who had stayed on with Mr. Allerton and was hired by the university when they took over in 1946. He, of course, retired in a year or two because of his age. We had one man, Ray Neuiker, who died in 1951, and he was replaced by Jim Rogers, and he is, of course, retired now. One fellow who came about a year after I was there was Enfer Evans from Bement, who now lives in Monticello. So he stayed on all those years, and he is now retired. Other than that, there have been numerous ones that have come and gone. Not too many of the original ones left anymore. I think Enfer Evans and I are about the only two, and Jim Rogers, the three of us who spent a number of years there that are still living.
How did the staff feel when the park was donated to the university?
We didn't know what to expect, but Mr. Allerton assured us that he had asked them to keep us on, so we really didn't worry much about it. And there were a few years of adjustments that took us a while to get accustomed to. Things were so different. We were used to running into town and buying whatever we needed. And, of course, we couldn't do that anymore. We had to go through channels. Mm-hmm. And there were numerous rules and regulations that we had to get familiar with. But overall, we did like it. We enjoyed working with the university.
Were the people that came out, visitors to the park, did they cooperate pretty well with taking care or helping to keep the park in nice shape, or were there problems?
For the first few years, we had very few problems. We didn't have as many visitors until the park got better known. And generally, they were pretty good. Later on, when we had more school groups and, what we called the hippies, we did have problems. We ran into some vandalism, of course. We've had numerous things taken, most of which we got back, and some things damaged. I think that has changed now, and really the problems are not that bad. Overall, I thought people were very good. to try and cooperate, take care of things, and abide by the rules. There's always a few that don't.
Yeah, that's true. What are your plans now?
We spend part of the winter either in Florida or Arizona. My wife's brother and sister spend their winters in Arizona, so we go there one year. The next year we go to Florida, where my brother spends the winter. And we have a camping trailer, which we like to use. And we're involved in different organizations, so we're busy.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and I thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I'm sure that I've forgotten many things that might have been of interest.
I think you did very well.